Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our 5th video lesson on supply and demand. I am Miss Jennifer Blank, and today we're going to be focusing on the other half of the model. We're going to be looking at supply. We're also going to examine movement versus shift of the supply curve, which you will note is dramatically similar to that of movement versus shift of the demand curve. All right, so because we're talking about supply, our topics and some of the key questions we're going to look at are going to shift a little bit. So we want to examine how the law of supply affects the quantity supplied, and we want to understand why does the supply curve shift. This is important stuff. So this is some of the key vocab we're going to talk about. Equilibrium we've already explored, but now we're going to look at supply specifically, the law of supply, the determinants of supply, and these concepts known as shortages and surpluses. So we're going to explore these ideas. All right, so what is supply? This is an important definition. Supply is the quantity of a good or service a firm is willing to produce at all prices. Okay, it's the quantity of a good or service that a firm is willing to provide at all prices, or produce at all prices. What is the law of supply? If nothing else changes, ceteris paribus, firms are willing to supply a greater quantity of a good or service at higher prices as opposed to lower. This makes a lot of common sense here, right? If you can make more money at producing something, well, you want to produce more of it because who doesn't want to make money, right? So at a given price, firms will only produce so much. If the price goes up, they'll produce more. If it goes lower, they'll produce less. All right, so let's take a look at what a supply schedule is. It's very similar to a demand schedule, except, well, it's about supply. So it shows how much of a good or service would be supplied at different prices. So here's an example, right? This is what at $350 per ticket, the supplier would be willing to produce 8,800. But if it's only $100 per ticket, they're only going to make 2,000. Similar, pretty straightforward. All right, so a supply curve shows graphically how much of a good or service people are willing to sell at any given price. Okay, just as demand curves normally slope downwards, supply curves normally slope upwards. Okay, the higher the price being offered, the more people will be willing to part with their hockey tickets in this particular example. Full disclosure, I did not make this slide. This slide I found from a fellow colleague who did a much better job than I possibly could at producing the slide. Or for that matter, the more of any good they would be willing to sell. So here we go. So we have our axes, right, and we have our supply schedule right over here. So let's graph this. So you see that's where the coordinate points are. And then there's your supply curve. Slopes upward, not downward. Demand curve does the opposite. So as the price rises, the quantity supplied rises. See? You look here, that's what they're willing to produce at that price. You go over here, and they're willing to produce a lot more because it's a much higher price. Now, a shift of the supply curve is a change in the quantity supplied of a good at any price. Okay, quantity supplied is about a specific change in price. When you have a shift of the curve, it's a general shift in supply. Doesn't matter the price. The big picture supply has changed. So let's take a look at that. So that's a supply curve before an announcement, for example. So let's say Gretzky is retiring. This is a little outdated for those of you who are excited about hockey. You remember Wayne Gretzky? He was a big-time guy a little while ago. I'm dating myself with using this example. But Gretzky was like the Michael Jordan, like the best player in hockey ever, right? So if he decides he's retiring, people want to go see those games before he actually checks out, right? So that's going to change a lot of stuff. So the announcement of Gretzky's retirement generates a decrease in supply, okay? It's a decrease in the quantity supplied at any given price, any given price. So supply curve after announcement, you see the supply curve shifted inward. This was before the announcement, and then once people hear that announcement, it's going to shift in. The decrease in supply shifts the supply curve to the left. Okay, so movements versus shift, right? You see 310 and point F. If you're moving, you're going to move to 400 and you're going to go to point C. You move from one point on the curve to another point on the curve. That is a movement, okay? Now, a shift is when the entire line moves. In this case, it shifted outward. So supply increased. Movement along versus shift. A movement along the supply curve is a change in the quantity supplied of a good. That is the direct result of a change in that good's price. Okay? Just like with demand. When you have just a price change, that's a movement. A change in the price of that good. Okay? A shift is something different. We'll talk about more about that shift in a minute. So you see price of ticket 250, and that's point A at S1. You move to point B, 200, and there's the change. Because the price of the ticket dropped, the quantity supplied is going to drop. From point A to point B, the decrease in quantity supplied reflects a movement. It's the result of a fall in the price of that good. Now, if you go from, say, A to C, like we have up here, that's going to indicate something different. From A to C is a decrease in quantity. The decrease in quantity supplied reflects a shift of the supply curve. It's the result of a decrease in the quantity supplied at any price. So it's not about just, we went from charging $2 to $1.50. No. That's a movement. But it doesn't matter when you have a shift. It doesn't matter the change in price. At any price, the quantity supplied has decreased. Why does this happen? Well, just like with demand, we have to look at determinants, which we'll get to in just a second. So that's a shift. It's not the same thing as a movement. Okay? So, shift the supply curve continued. Increase in supply, it shifts right. Decrease in supply, shifts left. Okay? Principal factors that shift the supply curve. We're going to go into more details about this, but I want to introduce these ideas to you right now. Changes in the price of an input, changes in technology, and changes in expectations. These are the principal things that shift the supply curve, though I have an acronym for you coming up. So why does the supply curve shift? Changes in input prices. An input is a good that is used to produce another good. Changes in technology, changes in income, changes in expectations. This is an acronym here to try to help you remember the determinants of supply. PIGTOES is my acronym. I know it's ridiculous, but maybe you'll remember it. Productivity, improvement in machines and production of processes of a good or service. That will shift supply. Inputs, changes in the price of the goods you use to make your good or service. Government actions, subsidies, taxes, and regulations. Technology, so if you improve machines, production processes, that shifts it as well. Outputs, price changes in other products produced by the firm. Expectations, what the producers think is going to happen to future prices and profits, and the size of the industry. How big is your competition, basically? How many other firms are competing with you? So, quantity supplied, we need to understand this. This is very, very important. Refers to how much of the product is offered at a particular price at a particular point in time. Like I said with quantity demanded, it is essential to understand the difference between supply and quantity supplied. So I would like you to check out, if you still have questions and you're still not really sure if you understand, check out this link that discusses supply versus quantity supplied. It gives you a nice detailed explanation and description. I think it'll help you learn more about that difference. Very important. That is the end of part 5. I hope this made sense and you learned what you needed to, and I will see you in part 6.